And they made a coffin of glass so that they might still look at her, and wrote her name upon it in golden letters, and that she was the king's daughter. And the coffin was placed upon the hill, and one of the dwarfs always sat by it and watched. And the birds of the air came too, and bemoaned Snow White. First of all came an owl, and then a raven, but at last came a dove. And thus Snow White lay for a long, long time, and still only looked as though she were asleep. For she was even now as white as snow, and as red as blood, and as black as ebony. At last a prince came and called at the dwarfs, and he saw Snow White, and read what was written in golden letters. Then he offered the dwarfs money, and earnestly prayed them to let him take her away. But they said, "We will not part with her for all the gold in the world." At last, however, they had pity on him, and gave him the coffin. But the moment he lifted it up to carry it home with him, the piece of the apple fell from between her lips, and Snow White awoke and said, "Where am I?" And the prince answered, "Thou art safe with me." Then he told her all that had happened, and said, "I love you better than all the world. Come with me to my father's palace, and you shall be my wife." And Snow White consented, and went home with the prince, and everything was prepared with great pomp and splendor for their wedding. To the feast was invited among the rest Snow White's old enemy, the queen. Who invited her? And as she was dressed herself in fine rich clothes, she looked in the mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror, tell me true, of all the ladies in the land, who is fairest? Tell me who." The mirror answered, "Thou, lady, art loveliest here, I ween, but lovelier far is the new made queen." When she heard this, she started with rage, but her envy and curiosity were so great that she could not help setting out to see the bride. And when she arrived, she saw that it was no other than Snow White, who, as she thought, had been dead a long while. She choked with passion and fell ill and died. But Snow White and the prince lived and reigned happily over the land many, many years. The Elves and the Shoemaker. There was once a shoemaker who worked very hard and was very honest, but still he could not earn enough to live upon, and at last all he had in the world was gone, except just leather enough to make one pair of shoes. Then he cut them all ready to make up the next day, meaning to get up early in the morning to work. His conscience was clear and his heart light amidst all his troubles. So he went peaceably to bed. Left all his cares to heaven and fell asleep. In the morning, after he said his prayers, he set himself down to his work. When to his great wonder there stood the shoes, all ready made, upon the table. The good man knew not what to say or think of this strange event. He looked at the workmanship. There was not one false stitch in the whole job, and all was so neat and true that it was a complete masterpiece. That same day a customer came in, and the shoes pleased him so well that he willingly paid a higher price than usual for them. And the poor shoemaker with the money bought leather enough to make 2 pairs more. In the evening he cut out the work and went to bed early that he might get up and begin betimes next day. But he was saved all the trouble, for when he got up in the morning, the work was finished, ready to his hand. Presently in came buyers who paid him handsomely for his goods, so that he bought leather enough for 4 pairs more. He cut out the work again overnight and found it finished in the morning, as before. And so it went on for some time. What was got ready in the evening was always done by daybreak. And the good man soon became thriving and prosperous again. One evening about Christmas time, as he and his wife were sitting over the fire chatting together, he said to her, "I should like to sit up and watch tonight, that we may see who it is that comes and does my work for me." The wife liked the thought, so they left a light burning and hid themselves in the corner of the room behind the curtain that was hung up there, and watched what should happen. As soon as it was midnight, there came 2 little naked dwarfs, and they sat themselves upon the shoemaker's bench, took up all the work that was cut out, and began to pie with their little fingers, stitching and rapping and tapping away at such a rate that the shoemaker was all amazed and could not take his eyes off the moment. And on they went till the job was quite finished, and the shoes stood ready for use upon the table. This was long before daybreak, and then they bustled away as quick as lightning. The next day the wife said to the shoemaker, "These little wights have made us rich, and we ought to be thankful to them and do them a good office in return. I am quite vexed to see them run about as they do. They have nothing upon their backs to keep the cold off. I'll tell you what, I will make each of them a shirt and a coat and a waistcoat, and a pair of platoons into the bargain. Do you make each of them a little pair of shoes?" The thought pleased the good shoemaker very much, and one evening when all the things were ready, they laid them on the table instead of the work that they used to cut out. And they then went and hid themselves to watch what the little elves would do. About midnight they came in and were going to sit down to do their work as usual. But when they saw the clothes lying for them, they laughed and were greatly delighted. Then they dressed themselves in the twinkling of an eye, and danced and capered and sprang about as merry as could be, till at last they danced out of the door over the green, and the shoemaker saw them no more. But everything went well with him from that time forward, as long as he lived. How long is this one? Because the battery light's flashing. Maybe we should just leave that there. Well, sometimes that flashes for a good solid minute before it's actually dead, so... The turnip. There were two brothers who were both soldiers. The one was rich, the other poor. The poor man thought he would try to better himself, so pulling off his red coat, he became a gardener and dug his ground well and sowed turnips. When the seed came up, there was one plant bigger than all the rest, and it kept getting larger and larger, and seemed as if it would never cease growing, so that it might have been called the Prince of Turnips. For there never was such a one seen before, and never will again. At last it was so big that it filled a cart, and 2 oxen could hardly draw it, and the gardener knew not what in the world to do with it, nor whether it would be a blessing or a curse to him. One day he said to himself, "What shall I do with it? If I sell it, it will bring no more than another, and for eating, the little turnips are better than this. The best thing, perhaps, is to carry it and give it to the king as a mark of respect." Then he yoked his oxen and drew the turnip to the court and gave it to the king. "What a wonderful thing!" said the king. "I have seen many strange things, but such a monster as this I never saw. Where did you get the seed? Or is it only your luck? If so, you are a true child of fortune." "No," answered the gardener. "I am no child of fortune. I am a poor soldier. Who could get enough to live upon? So I laid aside my red coat and set to work tilling the ground. I have a brother who is rich, and your majesty knows him well, and all the world knows him, but because I am poor, everybody forgets me." The king took pity on him and said, "You shall be poor no longer. I will give you so much that you shall be even richer than your brother." Then he gave him gold and lands and flocks, and made him so rich that his brother's fortune could not at all be compared with his. When the brother heard of all this, and how a turnip had made the gardener so rich, he envied him sorely, and bethought himself how he could contrive to get the same fortune for himself. However, he determined to manage more cleverly than his brother, and got together a rich present of gold and fine horses for the king, and thought he must have a larger gift in return. For if his brother had received so much for only a turnip, what must his present be worth? The king took the gift very graciously, and said he knew not what to give in return more valuable and wonderful than the great turnip. So the soldier was forced to put it into a cart and drag it home with him. When he reached home, he knew not upon whom to vent his rage.